The woods on the edge of a city hold a particular kind of silence. It's not the deep quiet of wilderness, but a temporary stillness, broken by the distant hum of traffic, a reminder that life is close but not here. In February of 1957, in a thicket just off Susquehanna Road in the Fox Chase section of Philadelphia, that silence was interrupted by a discovery that would haunt the city for generations. It was February 25th, a Monday. A young man from the nearby University of Pennsylvania was walking through the area. He was checking his rabbit traps, a common hobby at the time. His eyes caught something that didn't belong. It was a large cardboard box, the kind used to ship a bassinet or a cradle. It was lying on its side in a patch of weeds and brambles. Curious and perhaps already sensing something was wrong, he approached. He looked inside. He saw a small body, a child, wrapped in a cheap, faded blanket. The young man ran. He found a house with a phone and called the police. Philadelphia homicide detectives arrived at the scene. The box was a J.C. Penney bassinet carton. It was worn as if it had been reused many times. Inside, the body of a young boy, completely naked, was curled up. He was wrapped in that thin plaid blanket. His hair had been recently crudely cut, with uneven clumps cut close to the scalp. His body was clean but showed signs of bruising. There were scars, old and new. The scene was both tragic and bizarre. This was not a remote dumping ground. This was a well-traveled area near a road not far from homes. The box itself was a commonplace object, but its use as a coffin was chillingly callous. The child had been placed there with a kind of awful care, wrapped but discarded. From the very beginning, the detectives knew this case was different. This was not a street crime or a domestic dispute that spilled into public. This was the deliberate disposal of a child who, it seemed, no one was looking for. There were no missing person reports that matched him. No frantic parents had called the police. He was a boy in a box, abandoned in the woods, a mystery delivered to the doorstep of the city. The detectives carried the box with the boy still inside out of the thicket. It was a heavy burden in every sense. They knew they were not just investigating a murder. They were first tasked with answering the most basic, heartbreaking question: who was he? Without a name, there could be no justice. Without an identity, he belonged to no one. And so the hunt began, not for a killer, but for a name. The investigators would soon learn that this would be the most difficult search of all. The small body was taken to the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's office. The autopsy was performed by Dr. Joseph Spellman. The findings painted a picture of a short, brutal life and a sudden, violent end. The boy was Caucasian, between 4 and 6 years old. He was small for his age, weighing only about 30 pounds and standing roughly 3.5 feet tall. He had blue eyes and light brown hair. He was malnourished. His body showed evidence of chronic, severe abuse. There were old scars and healed fractures. He had recent bruises on his face, his chest, his limbs. But the cause of death was trauma to the head. He had suffered multiple severe blows. The medical examiner believed the fatal injuries were not from an accidental fall, but from a deliberate assault. There were other haunting details. His fingers and toenails were neatly trimmed. His body had been washed, even scrubbed in some areas, with a rough washcloth shortly before or after death. The crude haircut was also recent, the uneven cuts suggesting it was done in haste, possibly to change his appearance. The blanket he was wrapped in was common and cheap, sold in stores across the country. It offered no clues. The police were faced with a profound contradiction. The boy's body showed signs of long-term neglect and violence, yet in death someone had attended to him, washing him, cutting his nails, cutting his hair, wrapping him. It was a bizarre mix of cruelty and a twisted, final act of care. Was it guilt? Was it routine? The act of washing him, in particular, suggested an attempt to remove evidence, or perhaps a final, cold ritual. With no identity, the investigation had to start from zero. The first step was to give him a name, if only for official purposes. He became America's unknown child, but to the detectives and the press, he was simply the boy in the box. The police launched a massive effort to identify him. They circulated his description and a post-mortem photograph to every police department, children's home, and school in the region. They checked with hospitals and clinics for records of a boy with his distinctive scars. They followed up on thousands of tips about missing children. Every lead evaporated. No one claimed him. The public was captivated and horrified. Newspapers ran the story on the front page. The boy's likeness, a carefully rendered sketch based on the autopsy photo showing a serene, sleeping child, was printed on flyers and posted in store windows, subway stations, and phone poles across Philadelphia and beyond. The image was everywhere, a silent plea for recognition. But recognition never came. It was as if this boy had never existed in the eyes of the world. He had no dental records on file. His fingerprints, taken post-mortem, matched no known records. The scars on his body were not documented anywhere. The police began to consider terrible possibilities. Had he been kept hidden, perhaps in a basement or an attic, never enrolled in school, never taken to a doctor? Was he a child born out of wedlock and kept secret? Was he the victim of a family that simply erased him from their lives and then from the world? The box itself was traced. It was a specific model sold by J.C. Penney in the Philadelphia area in the months before his discovery. Detectives tracked the serial number and determined it had been sold at a store in West Philadelphia. They interviewed store clerks, but no one could remember who had bought it. It was a dead end. The blanket was equally common, impossible to trace. Months passed. The initial flood of tips slowed to a trickle. The boy's body, unclaimed, was buried in a potter's field grave. But the case was not closed. The detectives could not forget the boy's face or the awful question that hung over their work. In a city of millions, how could a child simply disappear without anyone noticing he was gone? As months turned into years, the boy-in-the-box case became a permanent, painful fixture for the Philadelphia police. The initial wave of publicity had failed to produce his name. The investigation settled into a long, grinding effort, sustained by the determination of a few dedicated detectives and the occasional heartbreaking tip that led nowhere. The police tried every conventional method. They expanded the search nationally, circulating the child's description and sketch through law enforcement networks across the country. They revisited hospitals and clinics, searching for records of a boy with the distinctive surgical scar found on his body, a mark from an inguinal hernia operation. They checked with schools and orphanages in a wider radius. The result was always the same: no match. The public's role was crucial but frustrating. Thousands of tips came in, everyone was followed up. Parents who had lost children in accidents or during births came forward, hoping and dreading that this was their son. None of them were. The police found themselves having to deliver the grim news that this was not their child, a bittersweet relief that did nothing to solve the mystery. One of the most promising early leads involved a pair of foster parents. A woman came forward saying she had briefly fostered a boy who matched the description. She claimed the biological mother had taken him back. Police tracked down the mother, who was alive and well. She produced her son, alive and healthy. The lead, like so many others, evaporated. The sheer lack of a missing person report was the investigation's greatest obstacle. In 1957, it was harder for a child to vanish completely. Communities were tighter, neighbors noticed absences. Yet no one reported this boy missing. This led investigators to a grim conclusion: the people responsible for his care were almost certainly the people responsible for his death. He was not kidnapped by a stranger. He was killed within the confines of whatever home he lived in, and those who knew him had no intention of reporting him gone. The case took a strange turn in 1958, a year after the discovery. A woman known only as M contacted the police through her psychiatrist. M claimed she had information. Her story was bizarre and detailed. She said her mother had purchased the boy from his birth parents in the summer of 1954. The boy, she said, was named Jonathan. He was kept in the basement of their home, which was described as a well-kept house in the Philadelphia suburbs. M said the boy was severely abused. She described the mother as mentally unstable and violent. According to M, the boy's death was an accident. She claimed her mother had hit him in a fit of rage after he vomited in the bathtub. After he died, the mother washed his body, cut his hair to alter his appearance, and then enlisted M to help dump the body in Fox Chase. M said they transported the boy in the bassinet box, which had been in their attic. The police investigated M's story thoroughly. They found the house she described. Neighbors confirmed a family had lived there, but no one recalled ever seeing a young boy. There was no physical evidence to link the house to the crime. M herself was deemed mentally unstable by investigators. Her story, while chillingly specific, could not be corroborated. Was it the tortured confession of a participant? or the elaborate fantasy of a troubled woman captivated by the famous case. The police could not prove it either way. The M testimony entered the case files as a compelling but unverified narrative, a ghost story that neither solved the mystery nor could be entirely dismissed. With no way to confirm M's story, the investigation stalled again. The boy in the box was reburied in a donated plot at Ivy Hill Cemetery, with a proper headstone paid for by the cemetery's caretaker and local donors. He was no longer in a potter's field. He had a resting place but still no name. The headstone read America's Unknown Child. It was a monument to a failure, the failure to find one small boy's identity in a vast and busy world. The story of M remained a divisive and unresolved thread in the case for decades. Without corroboration, it was little more than a dark rumor. The investigation entered a long period of dormancy, though it was never officially closed. The case file was revisited by new generations of detectives, a somber rite of passage in the Philadelphia Homicide Unit. Each review yielded no new answers, only a renewed sense of frustration. Then, in 1998, the case received a jolt of new energy. The Vidocq Society, a prestigious organization of retired and active law enforcement officials, forensic experts and prosecutors dedicated to solving cold cases, took an interest. They began a formal review of the entire investigation. This brought fresh eyes and modern forensic techniques to evidence that had been preserved for over 40 years. The Vidocq Society's review cast serious doubt on the M testimony. Their forensic analysis suggested the boy's body had not been kept in a basement, as M claimed. Soil and botanical evidence on the blanket and in the boy's hair did not match a basement environment. Instead, it was consistent with him having been kept in a rural setting, perhaps with farm animals. This finding, while not identifying the boy, seemed to dismantle the only detailed narrative ever offered about his life. The society also focused on new forensic possibilities. They authorized the exhumation of the boy's body in 1998 to obtain DNA samples. This was a delicate process. The goal was to extract mitochondrial DNA, which could potentially be used to identify maternal relatives. The exhumation and subsequent analysis were successful. A DNA profile was created. It was entered into national missing persons databases, but again there was no match. No family came forward seeking a lost child through genetic comparison. The wall of silence around his identity remained solid. Another lead emerged from this period, one with a more concrete foundation. A woman came forward with a detailed childhood memory. She told investigators that in 1954, when she was a young girl, her parents had purchased a boy from his birth mother. The transaction, she said, took place at a diner in Camden, New Jersey. She said the boy lived with her family for a short time, but he was not treated as a son. He was kept as a virtual slave, she claimed, forced to do chores and sleep in the basement. She remembered him being beaten. One day, she said, he was simply gone. Her parents told her he had been returned. She believed this boy was the boy in the box. Her story was hauntingly similar in some aspects to M's, but with different players. She provided names and locations. The Vidocq Society and Philadelphia police investigated this new claim vigorously. They identified the family she named. They found the diner. But as with M, they could find no hard evidence to connect this specific family to the crime. No witnesses besides the woman herself could confirm the boy's existence in that household. The family members, when questioned, denied it completely. Once more, investigators were left with a compelling story that hovered just beyond the reach of proof. These later developments highlighted the central, agonizing problem of the case: an abundance of theory, a complete absence of verifiable fact when it came to his identity. The forensic evidence suggested a rural, possibly impoverished background. The stories from M and the other witness suggested a black market adoption or a gray market child sale, a horrific but not unheard of practice in the mid-20th century. Both stories described a child treated as property, hidden from the world, and ultimately disposable. The pattern fit the facts of the boy's hidden life and brutal death. Yet without a name, a birth certificate, or a single piece of paperwork, these stories could not be nailed down. The boy's DNA sat in a database, a silent sentinel waiting for a relative to take a commercial ancestry test, a development that was still decades in the future. For the time being, the investigation had reached its limit. Science had provided a new tool, but without a family to compare it to, the tool was useless. The boy in the box was genetically as alone as he had been in the woods in 1957. For over 60 years, the boy in the box was America's unknown child. His case was a quiet, persistent ache in the history of American crime, a reminder of a life erased so completely it seemed to defy logic. The theories were few and grim. He was a victim of a hidden adoption, a black market transaction gone tragically wrong. He was a child kept secret by a family because of shame, disability, or abuse. He was a boy who existed only in the shadows and whose death was meant to be as anonymous as his life. The dedicated efforts of the Vidocq Society and Philadelphia police kept the case alive. They maintained a website with his information. They periodically released new facial reconstructions based on the latest forensic anthropology, hoping the updated image might trigger a memory, but the decades rolled on. The detectives who first worked the case passed away. The generation that remembered the headlines of 1957 grew old. It seemed the mystery would remain forever unsolved, a cold case file and a small, well-tended grave in Ivy Hill Cemetery. Then, in late 2022, a breakthrough that had been hoped for but never achieved finally happened. The Philadelphia Police Department and the Vidocq Society held a press conference. They announced they had identified the boy in the box. The key was genetic genealogy. This modern technique involves uploading an unknown subject's DNA to public genealogy databases, finding distant relatives, and then using traditional genealogical research to build a family tree backward and then forward to identify potential closer relatives. It is a painstaking process, but it had solved dozens of other cold cases. Now it had turned its focus to the boy. Investigators did not release his name immediately, citing the need to notify living family members and the ongoing nature of the death investigation. But they confirmed they now knew who he was. They stated he was from the Delaware County area just west of Philadelphia. They said he had not been reported missing at the time. This last detail confirmed the oldest and darkest suspicion. The people who should have cared for him were involved in his disappearance. In the following months, more information was carefully released. In March 2023, his name was made public. He was Joseph Augustus Zurelli. He was born on January 13, 1953. He was 4 years old when he died. The announcement brought a profound, complicated closure. A name was finally etched onto the headstone that had for so long read America's unknown child. The identification was a monumental feat of science and persistence, but it did not automatically solve the crime. The case of who killed Joseph Zurelli remains an active homicide investigation. The circumstances of his life and death are now the focus. Who were his parents? Why was he not reported missing? The answers to these questions lie within the memories of people who are now very old and within records that may have been lost to time. The emotional resolution of this story is therefore mixed. There is relief that Joseph finally has his name back, that he is no longer a symbol but a specific boy with a specific birthday. The community that tended his grave for decades, leaving toys and flowers for the unknown boy, can now direct their remembrance to Joseph. Yet the core tragedy remains, now sharpened by a name. Joseph Augustus Zurelli lived a short, brutal life that ended in violence. He was discarded in a box. For 65 years, the world did not know he was gone. The identification does not erase that history, it finally allows us to see it clearly. The mystery of the boy in the box is in one sense solved. We know his name, but in a deeper sense the mystery continues. The mystery of how a society could lose a child so completely. The mystery of the suffering he endured in silence. And the enduring mystery of who exactly was responsible for the terrible injuries that ended his life at the age of 4. Joseph's story is no longer an unsolved historical puzzle. It is now a named homicide, a specific loss. The question that remains is not who was he, but who did this to him and why. The search for justice for Joseph Augustus Zurelli is the final, ongoing chapter of a story that began in a thicket off a Philadelphia road on a cold February day in 1957. He is unknown no more, but the full truth of his life and death may still be waiting to be told.